Hi again. I had someone there asking me if Dungeons and Dragons RPG games are somehow evil or satanic like this. Well, the instant answer to that is absolutely they're not. And they're actually, for most people, a fantastic hobby and a very, very good thing to be involved in. But for some people, they damage them. And it's just like any other aspect of life. You'll have 10,000 people go to it, or 50,000 people go to a soccer game. 1,000 of them, or not 500, might be hooligans looking for trouble. That doesn't mean that soccer matches or games are bad. That just means like any aspect of society, there's an element who cannot handle it in a safe way or in a healthy way. Now, the whole idea of this thing of Dungeons and Dragons being satanic all comes from the same disgusting satanic panic mindset that started in the 1980s when there was a really nasty, vicious war on things like heavy metal music. Remember, Judas Priest were basically charged with making to disturbed kids in America commit suicide. It's just bollocks. And you had Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, getting labels on everything, the PMRC, and catering. It's funny, isn't it? She was all catering to the Bible Belt back then. And this whole thing, this Christianity started, like TV evangelism got gigantic in America. And you had things like social workers in Britain and in America and in Canada and in Australia accusing people of satanic panics and arresting innocent communities, always working class communities, and claiming that they were all raping their children and everything. It's horrible. And they were all involved in satanic ritual abuse of children. And this is where all the truthers get it from today. Or D&D and RPG is excellent. It creates imaginative thinking. It gets people who may have difficulty socializing, developing their confidence. It gets people together to escape from the troubles of life. Now, the escapism part is where the trouble comes in because, like the other video I made on the possessive avatar, a kind of a RPG avatar appears in some people where they can't separate what goes on the tabletop with their real life behavior. And this again is would be a small number of people involved in this, tiny, but yeah, it's true. It does happen. I've seen it myself with my own eyes. RPGs are fantastic. They also encourage learning in other ways. They get people involved in the theater of the mind, the idea of adaptability, changing things, working within rules, but also allowing yourself to be flexible within rules. This is very, very great stuff for imaginative and cognitive development. There's also the element of uh, like I said, the socializing thing is great, and also it gets people into other things, like people who start off playing RPG games like oh, well, so many of them are out there, but like Dungeons and Dragons being the most famous one and most popular, and Pathfinder, they might then move into things like historical war games, which is great. And also, the Warhammer thing also has is another aspect of that, and that gets people to move into the Warhammer's not role playing games, although there are role playing elements within in it. The They move into things like historical wargaming, and they learn about history. That some of them take a real interest in history, and I used that was my gaming thing. I used to play 28 millimeter. I still do. I still have all the stuff. If I can find someone to play with, it's just I live in the countryside and there's no one really into it where I am. But I used to play. I used to be a member of a wargaming club, and I used to love 28 millimeter Dark Ages skirmish games. I used to love anything to do with Vikings and also fantasy games as well. Fantasy Middle Ages games. I love the when Games Workshop came out with the Lord of the Rings, the rule book in the early 2000s. That is still a brilliant game because it was so simple and so basic, but it was also, in terms of when it gets into things like spell casting and stuff like that, there was uh, there was uh, almost role playing elements within there. And one time I remember someone was telling me a story. I don't remember where, that there was one guy that they used to come to his wargaming club, and he used to take defeat very, very badly. So say he had he had an army of models which he'd built, invested money in. It's not a cheap hobby. Well, it's not a super expensive hobby, but it's not cheap. It takes a lot of, you have to paint the models and build them and collect them and have the right formations and uh, setups to play in these battles. And they would go. He would go mad. He said he would literally nearly have nervous breakdowns when he would lose a game, and he couldn't understand it. And then he realized it's because all the psychological investment he put into it. And this is where the D&D part can be dangerous, the element of psychological investment. Now, what happens is, in say a typical D&D scenario, you will have a dungeon master who controls the game, and you have who will set out a scenario or an adventure, or this, or or a campaign, and each person will assume an element, an avatar within the game. So you can be a wizard or an elf or a thief or a knight or something. There was all kinds of things like that, right? This is just D&D, but there's other games you can have it in, like, that there's other kinds of things like monsters and stuff like that. And you could be like a detective, and this kind of, they're actually great games, those kind of ones. Now, the what happens is that some people play D&D and RPG so much that it becomes their crutch from real life. They may have a shitty job. They may have a difficulty socializing with people. They may suffer from extreme shyness. So the D&D world becomes so deeply important to them. And the D&D games become so completely important to them because it gives them a power and an element they don't have in real life. They don't have in real life. And therefore, some cases, they transfer their D&D mindset into real life. And I'll give you an example. You know, the where you have these people who move from cult to cult. One year they may be born again Christians. The next year they may be extreme SJWs. The next year truthers. The next year OTO. Well, those people, what they're really doing is they're running away from themselves because they don't really feel comfortable in themselves. They feel an element of failure at some level. And that's okay. A lot of people do feel that in the society. And they have this mindset where the next thing will be the answer. Well, if you couple that mentality with someone who plays D&D, or you bring that mentality to D&D, they will treat the people in their real life just like they treat the elements and the characters on the board game. So, for instance, they will think nothing of, just like a cult member will suddenly forget their old friends, family members, people they know, people who never did them any harm, and they will even attack them, even if because they've now joined a cult. So you'll have someone who's knew a friend who was uh, anti-Christian, and the cult person now joins a Christian cult, even though the other person was their friend and never did anything negative to them, was only ever nice to them. They will stop talking to them and they will stop liking them because the cult will tell them. The mandate of the cult is, he's not one of us anymore. And you get the same thing in some D&D players. They bounce through life moving from one social cluster to another, and or segmenting within that social cluster. And what that social cluster is, and the ones they've walked away from, is this is their new set of adventurers. You understand? This is the new tabletop. And there's a leader in that circle, and that's the new dungeon master. And they've taken a whole thing. They've moved, so they treat people, real life people, just like the figures, the miniatures on the board game, in the role playing game. And this, of course, this is not the norm, but it does happen to some of them, a small, tiny percentage. Most people who play RPG are very healthy and very. It's like I said, it's a great tool for imagination, but for some, it's a method of looking for a new group to join and discarding the old group. or if an individual has been shunned by that group, even though that other individual is never anything but nice to them personally, they have to, the dungeon master who's leading the group, their new dungeon master, they have to obey and develop into the same hive mind that caused the jump from being a born again Christian to an OTO member to a SJW to a Thruther to anything. And you get that in things like even Alcoholics Anonymous, like someone who may be in a AA and they may have a friend who still likes going on the piss, and this friend may not impose their drinking on them, may be very respectful and not drink around them, may never ask them out, will never be drunk around them, or if they're going out with them, will not order a soft drink out of respect. They will still turn on that person and shun them because they're not a member of the AA cult. And the D&D thing can be the same. And I've seen it. I've seen it in D&D groups. It's like they can be terrible factions where someone is pushed as an outsider, and this goes into their real life, and it's all about this thing of please be my friend. I need a friend. Please be my friend. Those types. They're the ones who bounce from cult to cult to cult, and there's the ones who have they're obsessed with RPG games and D&D, and they apply the tabletop rules to life. So they will just suddenly drop people like a ton of bricks and walk away from them for no reason at all. Absolutely no reason given. Nothing personal ever done. It's just because they're off now with a new bunch of adventurers. And that mentality was weaponized or justified by the RPG, the Dungeons and Dragons mindset. So, no, absolutely, the evidence of people who play D&D and role-playing games is over the top positive. However, like any aspect of life, there will be people who are damaged by it, or their behavior affected by it, and their treatment of other people. They reduce other people's lives and their to the 20 mil. You will become the enemy. You will become the 28 millimeter monster, or orc, in their minds in real life, because your new dungeon master has told you. And then they do it at the workplace situations, their social situations. It's they cannot detach the RPG mind on the tabletop from reality. They absolutely need they have to fit in, and these people have no ethics. They have no they will turn their eyes to the most unbelievable hypocrisies and injustices and double standards in order to make sure that they don't lose or don't fall out with their new friends, their new cluster, their new adventurers, to complete their quest set out by the dungeon master, who's a dominant personality within that, often a pathological personality within that. And they cannot exist without the hive mind, because being an individual is a terrifying thing to them. And so, most of the criticism level at D&D and RPG is by born again Christian whack jobs who say it's satanic or invokes demons. Actually, there's an element of truth to that, in the sense that if you look at the true meaning of the term demon, it comes from daemon, and it's in many ways, if your character on the table is a daemon in a way, it is another part of your. It's almost like your subconscious self dressed up in a costume rather than your conscious self. It's very interesting. It's very you can learn an awful lot by playing role playing games and tabletop wargaming. You can learn so much about psychology and human behavior, but you can also see, people, the way people say, I am my art, like what you hear in my songwriting is what you see in real life, or how I feel inside. My paintings they come from the heart, they come from my feelings and my poetry and so on. Well, the same thing happens for things like D&D. They will imply, they will apply their adventurer mentality to real life, but it's not about going on an adventure. It's about not living in fear of not doing what the dungeon master tells them, and terror of not losing their little adventurers band in real life. And whether uh, that mentality was already there before. These are all the same kind of people that bounce from cult to cult, they're movement to movement to movement. You'll find that that mentality is there. That's an addict mentality. You'll find a lot of them are addicts too. They'll be either alcoholics or chain smokers, or they'll have like they'll have periods in their life where they were absolutely fucking enormous stoners, that kind of thing as well. And so one of the things with these people is it doesn't mean they're bad people. It's just that they make terrible judgments in life because they've got at some level they're still children. The child is still there, and they, rather than be a man and have guts and do the right thing, they will follow the quest. And that's the only danger in it. And that again, it only applies to a tiny amount of D&D RPG players. There's absolutely no occult in it. There's no evil in it. There's no demons in it. There's no devil worship in it. It's simply a a structure that can sometimes, very rarely, impact on people's behavioral uh, aspects within them in society and how they relate to the people around them.